You're not autistic, buddy. Just because you like to listen to post-punk, shoegaze, drone industrial music and can't get into bitches doesn't mean you're autistic. So when you're browsing social media sites such as R9K, Mew, Lit, I know how that sounds, Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, or the Sharding, and you see people claiming to be autistic, you have to think to yourself, what's going on here? Why do internet people tend to conflate socially awkward behavior, which is what they're referring to, and autism? Because socially awkward behavior is a part of the autism spectrum, but does not encompass it entirely. So what I assume to be happening is that these people who would probably identify with the classical definition of nerd in a past era co-opted the word autism. But then you have to ask yourself, why did they co-opt the word autism? So my general assumption here is going to be a bit schizo, and it's that in 2015 or so, with the release of Star Wars The Force Awakens, and get this, Gamergate, mainstream culture appropriated the word nerd. So since pop culture, appropriated the word nerd, the true nerd cells among us, needed another term, to describe their social awkward disposition and their social alienation. And they came to the word autism because it was close enough. But yeah, once again, all of that might have just been skits on my part, since the rise and fall of the sitcom The Big Bang Theory happened in pretty much the same time frame. And I think we all know what word that is associated with. However, I'd like to mention the whole reason for bringing up that tangent and introducing this video like that is because people using the word autism improperly does harm to autistic people, number one, or people with autism, people first language. But most importantly, it does harm to people who use that type of language because it causes them to set limits on what they can accomplish. But anyway, now that we've established my theory that arbitrarily calling yourself autistic puts unnecessary limitations on what you're able to actually accomplish, let's look at the traits that are bundled along with social awkwardness that causes people to call themselves autistic. So what do I think these traits are? I think they're above average intelligence, being a bit obsessive, and as I've previously mentioned, a bit socially awkward. So now let's mull over these traits, find the virtues or lack thereof of these traits, and see what somebody could accomplish if they don't call themselves autistic and just apply themselves to achieve some goal, some sort of voluntarism. Alright, so to accomplish this task that we're about to embark on, we're going to have some criteria to determine if these skills or the skill set is being used effectively. And what I've decided to do, to set as a criteria is living a good life. But what do I mean by a good life? Since it's arbitrary and sort of subjective and depends on the person you're speaking to, I'm just going to chalk it up to what, collective consensus on a good life would be, which is like a well-paying job, relationships that are working out fine, and some sort of happiness that you can achieve down the line or in the future that you're looking forward to, like retirement or maybe having children, and if you've already had children, well, retirement. And I just realized that while discussing the topic good life, I have Nick McGinn ethics, like a Chad, on my desk that I haven't cracked open and read. So if we're using my operational definition for a good life, no matter how you cut it, I don't think you can make being socially awkward a good thing. Maybe it can work in a like relationship context if your partner is some person that's into that, I guess. I've only seen it in movies, by the way. But yeah, for the most part, I don't think being socially awkward and not being able to communicate will help you at all throughout your life. Simply based on the fact that humans' whole thing, not the niche we fill, but I guess the evolutionary mechanism that allowed us to fill our niche is the fact that we can communicate and have language and we can exchange ideas, right? So being socially awkward is probably going to hurt you in work. You're probably going to make less money. If you're employed by somebody, you'll probably be able to less effectively communicate with them. And if you are an employer or like a business owner, you'll probably be less able to communicate with employees or your business, like your clients, basically. And as for interpersonal relationships, typically being socially awkward means you're bad at interpersonal relationships, right? And that could cascade into a whole bunch of not so great things in your personal and private life. So the next trait is intelligence. So here on the script, I have that intelligence is probably the most universally good among these traits since it's just pattern awareness. But I realized while I was recording the first draft of this video that pattern awareness could get you into trouble, right? Because if you start to notice some like not so savory patterns about particular races of people, you're inevitably going to get into. It's kind of similar to how most AI turn white supremacists, which isn't cool. White supremacy isn't based in red pill, guys. But yeah, for the most part, intelligence, just pattern awareness skills. You're probably doing no material harm to yourself most of the time, unless you manage to, reason your way into nihilism, and not like hear about the thought of nihilism and see people on the internet calling it cool based on red pill, like what used to happen like on Lit when I was young. Maybe not. Maybe it was just like forums I was reading. People thought nihilism was based on red pill. I thought it was based on red pill because the guys who could type long paragraphs were talking about it. But yeah, that's not the culture there nowadays. But yeah, so if you can actually reason your way into nihilism and not just be swept up by some current into believing it's cool because it's a foreign concept to you, then you can probably reason your way out of it since you're probably smart enough. But for the most part, intelligence just goes wasted, and that's probably the real saddest thing that you can do with intelligence. And the last trait I have here is obsessiveness. Obviously, obsessiveness is sort of a double-edged sword, right? Because you could be very blessed with what you find interesting. So if you genuinely like math and physics, and you're not like me and just liked it because of the Big Bang Theory, you probably have a golden ticket to a well-paying job. But if you like My Little Pony, brother, I'm very sorry for you. If you like combing on ponies and jars, I don't know what I can tell you to make your life less terrible, right? Yeah, but I just brought those two examples to show how unpredictable being obsessive could be. I don't think you like this would hinder you from necessarily being able to feed yourself, like not being able to talk to your employer, and I don't think it would necessarily restrict you from a lot of like healthy interpersonal relationship stuff, right? Because everybody has hobbies. So what was the point of this whole diatribe? Well, it was just to show you that these traits don't necessarily exist in a vacuum, and having them most definitely doesn't determine if a person will have what we call a good or bad life. It's simply just how these traits are expressed, if they manifested positively or negatively, right? So now let's take a hypothetical guy, a hypothetical example, and throw him into the world with these traits and see how he does. So our hypothetical guy reaches his first impasse. He has to decide whether he'll use his learning capacity to consume videos about fear and hunger lore, or actually study for his degree at school like a good boy. Yeah, so let's just say that he actually does watch as much YouTube videos as possible. Sure, he'll probably get a little bit of knowledge on a bunch of like random topics which he could string together in a way that makes him a decent conversationalist probably. But I don't think that random factoids from YouTube videos will be all too useful when you're trying to get paid for a skill, right? But if he studies a STEM subject, well, obviously, or any subject that is required to accomplish some sort of licensing thing, right? Like biochemistry for being a doctor, physics for being a pilot, that will actually probably have some utility to him, unlike, being a weird YouTube person. This is a bit tangential, but when I wrote this script, I think I was reading economics in one lesson by Henry Hazlitt. I think that's his name. So this whole essay is very economics pilled, and I've been subtracting all those parts. But I kind of mentioned in that, previous segment, now, there's less people that know the skill, and the skill's harder to get, so naturally, you'll get paid more, right? So isn't that really smart? Isn't that a good decision? But anyways, so let's say our friend, right, tries to rationalize away his social awkwardness, which a lot of people try to do nowadays. And he spends all day playing video games, being racist on the internet, and he contends that I'll never have to socialize anyway, because I have a trust fund and my mom and dad can pay for me, or I have a mental disability and I can get neat books from the government. While that sounds fun and all, jerking off and playing video games and being racist all day, I don't think that's feasible long term. And the reason I don't think that's feasible is if you frequent image boards often, you'll see that a bunch of people are in those situations, and for the most part, they're just like unhappy, except the guys who've been doing it for 10 to 20 years. They're very impressive people, impressive in their own sense, right? But yeah, so let's imagine our friend decided, you know what, I won't be racist all day. I'll pull myself up from my bootstraps and not be socially awkward, right? Well, obviously, multiple facets of life would open up to him. He'd probably perform better at his job, since he can communicate better with his associates, his co-workers, which could lead to a higher paying job, which could lead to promotion, and you get the shtick, right? And most importantly, he could get bitches. He wouldn't be autistic anymore. Lastly, not to dwell too long on this point, let's just say he has a nickel addiction, gets it under control, balances it with other important facets of his life, stops buying figurines like a weirdo, because he realized that there are things that are more important to his long-term happiness, and he was conscientious enough to mentally conceptualize that doing these things would lead him to a life that's permanently dejected, right? If he was constantly playing video games and constantly cooming. Now let's look at our friend's life. If he permanently existed in this state where he was negatively expressing the 3 traits we've spoken about so far. 3 tree. Oh. He'd continue to waste away his life, wondering to himself, why is nothing going my way? You'd think that he'd make a change for the better upon realizing that this is happening. What happens most of the time with people who just hate themselves and call themselves autistic is that they gravitate toward communities that have low expectations for them. They're in similarly shitty life circumstances, right? So in effect, he'd be throwing away all the promise that his life had to start, all the potential that people around him said he had. People never said this to me, I was a retarded child. Real and true. So our hypothetical friend is hurting no one here by keeping himself stuck in this inertia trap. And if I could just spitball a theory that's probably wrong, I think it's because humans tend to do what they view as most beneficial after a cost-benefit analysis. That might not be a logically sound cost-benefit analysis, right? Ludwig Wittgenstein didn't write it. Immanuel Kant didn't proofread it. But people who live in these circumstances, who have materially comfortable lives and are socially awkward and don't have any real incentive to change their lives, won't. And why would they? Why would you give up your comfy life as a NEET who has everything he needs to fail over and over again because there's a distant chance that you could be happier? Yes, last but not least, let's look at the person that I think best exemplifies these nerd traits within the past, I guess 230, 250 years, and that'd be Napoleon Bonaparte himself. Dans mon esprit tout divague, je me perds dans tes yeux. I think it's kind of self-evident that Napoleon was pretty intelligent. Obviously, he was a brilliant military tactician, which would have required high levels of pattern awareness, pattern recognition. If he was able to identify winning positions in battle, he'd have to have extensive knowledge of military tactics and how to apply them. But where did that knowledge of the military tactics come from? Well, Napoleon was kind of obsessive about wars, He studied tactics constantly. He knew about all of history's great generals and leaders that existed before him and took them as, he can't believe he was the heir to the legacy of guys like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. I don't know if he liked Charlemagne, but he probably did. Based in Tradcath Charlemagne. And lastly, Napoleon was a spurg when he was young, right? So Napoleon had a bit of a weird accent when he moved from Corsica to France, and he spent all day in his room reading and writing, and he was uncomfortable and nervous around women, so he was literally me. He overcame his social awkwardness and became charismatic enough to lead the French army. So what do you think would have happened if Napoleon resigned himself to being autistic, as people would coin nowadays? Napoleon would have never been able to live a fulfilling life. He would have never been able to make his myth, make a name for himself. He'd stay home or in his school dormitory all day, writing his Corsican history book, thinking to myself, nobody's gonna ever write a history of Corsica as good as this, and I'm so special. Anyways, sorry about that. There's a good chance that we wouldn't even know who he is. So in essence, don't waste away your life because some label that you heard from internet people, is putting arbitrary limits on what you could do, right? There is something that you can do, and there's always something that you can do.